Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Yankee Cowboy Podcast. And today's topic is pretty awesome. It is the Week 8 round recap of the NFL season. We got a lot to talk about. We have a lot of storylines, and let's get right to it, shall we? Now, I'll be remiss if I didn't talk about this, but we have ourselves legitimate parity now in the NFL. It is probably one of the few times in the NFL that you have teams that are terrible, you have teams that are really awesome, and then you have very few in between. So keep that in mind going forward here as I talk about some of these games that happened here in week 8. And really what you saw was, like I said, there's true parity in the NFL now. And I mean this legitimately. There is always going to be someone that's upset in their fandom about how crappy their teams are. So, team on the bye weeks were the Cowboys, and I believe the Cowboys were not on the bye. I'm sorry, there was nobody on the bye week this week. I excuse me for my missed goings there, but yeah. So the week 8 started off with the Vikings and the Rams, and that game was really universally across the board pretty awesome. A lot of back and forth there. Vikings versus the Rams. You would expect the Vikings to kind of continue what they were doing on the defensive side of the ball, and they looked like they were doing some really great things on offense. And then basically the bus stopped, as they say, in the offensive side of the ball. It looked like the Rams just figured out what they need to figure out on offense. Puka Nacua had most of his his first showing back since week 1. Had a great game. Cooper Kupp being off for injury. I don't think people really expected Puka Nacua to be back as fast as he was. I think he just came off of IR that day. So for him to make an appearance, and not just make an appearance, but really have himself a game. Now, Justin Jefferson was no slouch either. He was 8 for 115 yards. So really great game if you ask me to start the week. And then it kind of got to the Sunday games where you saw an upset. You saw some traditional action. You saw an ass whooping. And you saw a Hail Mary that arguably was the game or the play that was talked about all week long up to this point. So you talk about this, and I mean this as parody as the theme of the week. For example, the Eagles in the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bengals have not been a good team for most of the year, and that continued here. Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley just kept on doing his thing. Averaging almost 5 yards a carry, I think, a little close to that. I think he was a little short. I think he was almost 4.8, something like that, yards per carry. Jalen Hurts did his thing, and they won 37-17. Still, like I said, going to the rule of parity. Now, there was, like I said, an ass whooping, which was the Lions versus the Titans. And the Titans are not a good football team. They're using Mason Rudolph as a quarterback. And Jared Goff threw for 3 touchdowns, and Lions ran up the score to 52-14. So that's where you kind of saw, like I said, parity, right? Browns versus the Ravens, that is where the train got off the rails a little bit when it comes to that theme. They went to Jameis Winston in Cleveland as a quarterback since the injury of Deshaun Watson. And Derrick Henry still had himself a showing. He went 11 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. Zay Flowers had himself 7 receptions for 115 yards. So it still wasn't so much a complete game from the Ravens as it wasn't a full game. But I'm sorry, take that back. It wasn't a complete onslaught by the Browns, but it definitely wasn't a complete game by the Ravens. They still have some ways to go to work through, and I think they'll continue to work on that. on the defensive side of the ball. That's going to be the struggle. But I think going down the line here, I think the Ravens can definitely work on those things down the stretch here because they're a great football team. I think that's going to be the team to beat. I already called them in the AFC over the Chiefs. If they can figure out that defensive secondary, that'll be pretty sweet. The Cardinals and the Dolphins, that was a 1-point game. Really wasn't competitive, but it was Tua Tagovailoa's return. And, there was no really defense there. It was just pretty much throw the ball. There was some defense, I would say maybe the last, 3 to 4 yards, 3 to 4 minutes of the game, but that was it. Not really impressive by any of the teams. The Arizona tight end there, McBride, having 9 receptions for 124 yards as it was celebrated as Tight Ends Day in the NFL. So a lot of tight ends got their touchdowns. So I want to tell everyone, in the fantasy football side or maybe the daily fantasy, to kind of keep an eye out for that. Like in this case, don't get yourself all tripped up on, tight ends scoring touchdowns. That was an anomaly in itself. A lot of them did. And the next game I want to really talk about is for my fandom is the Jets and Patriots. And for the Patriots to win against the New York Jets in Foxborough was pretty awesome. The game was really a back and forth matchup. Drake May left the game, I think, with a concussion. Jacoby Brissett came back into the game, but Aaron Rodgers still had himself 17 for 28, 233 yards throwing, two touchdowns. Mr. Hall, the running back for the Jets, had himself 16 carries for 80 yards. So not to be a slouch, he was, still almost a little over 4 yards a carry. Still very good. Mr. Garrett Wilson had himself 5 for 113. So how much of that was in garbage time, or not garbage time, but down the stretch there in the game? Very difficult to tell on the stat lines, but you really want to pay attention to some of that stuff when you're picking your players. But as the matchups really kind of come down the stretch here, in this podcast, I know I'm just doing a recap of scores and stat lines and things, but I really want to really, really be key on this. When you're picking your fantasy football lineups, you want to do matchups, right? You want to do things that are going to favor your player to score the most amount of points possible, right? You really don't want to pick like a game. I'll just give an example. In this game, the Packers and the Jaguars, that's a really great matchup because the Jaguars are 2-6. But if you have a Colts player, let's say, and they're playing against the Texans like they were, you had yourself a struggle bus, So let's pick or you had a Saints player like you had Alvin Kamara, or you had some of these players that are really difficult matchups, and you weren't sure how they were going to perform. So you really need to focus on that down the stretch. Like I'll say this, like Patrick Mahomes, really great quarterback, but he himself only had 263 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Kareem Hunt had himself arguably a mediocre day on the ground because he was only averaging like less than 3 yards a carry. So you got to keep that in mind. And, like Jayden Daniels had himself 326 yards, 1 touchdown. That's all he had was 1 touchdown. If you're playing fantasy football, you don't want your quarterback to only have 1 touchdown. Need points. All right, so back to the action, gentlemen and ladies. All right, Buccaneers and Falcons was the next great game, I think. Really great defensive matchup. Baker Mayfield had 3 touchdowns, 330 yards. Really, really good, in my view, game of the week was that one. The Jaguars and Packers game later in the next window kind of was a deceptive enjoying watching of the game because, it seemed like there was no defense. And the Green Bay just ran the ball like 25 carries, 127 yards, 2 touchdowns. Josh Jacobs just ran the ball up and down the field on Jacksonville. So very good. The Colts and Texans game was another divisional round game. But this game got controversial for other reasons. And and I think a lot of people, we can talk about that briefly, and I will, is that Anthony Richardson left the game. He tapped himself out, which, if I mean by tapped himself, is usually when a player wants to get subbed out, is usually they'll tap their helmet, and the player that's next to the depth chart will come in and replace you. Usually that happens with fatigue, or it happens a lot with defensive players and offensive line or defensive players. Usually doesn't really happen too much on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe running backs, if it's things like that. But in this case, it made a controversial thing. And as of this recording, Joe Flacco has been picked and selected for the starting quarterback position of the Indianapolis Colts going forward. So, with that kind of decision making, I think the Colts are going to be more competitive down the stretch. They're 4-4, so the Indianapolis Colts can go either way for the rest of the year. They need to right the ship a little bit, and really, when you look at the teams like I just mentioned before, the Buccaneers and the Falcons, that is a divisional matchup. And believe it or not, the Falcons and the Buccaneers are pretty evenly matched. And that game was remarkable to watch on the offensive side of the ball. And for the Buccaneers to score that many points with two of their offensive weapons out, very, very good showing, in my opinion. Very, very good showing, in my opinion. Now, some of the disappointments I have is kind of down the stretch here. The Saints and the Chargers. The Saints are 2-6. I expect a lot more out of them. Alvin Kamara, arguably, remarkably, one of the best running backs in the game. Utility back, up and down back, very, very competitive. So the Chargers to go up there and you have, them do what they did. It was pretty crazy if you ask me. Just watching the Chargers do what they do. And they know they're uphill struggles for the Chargers. They got to go against the Chiefs. But for Justin Herbert and Harbaugh to do what they're doing right now in Los Angeles is pretty remarkable. And they will keep on doing what they do. Now, is it perfect? It's the football season, man. It's 18 weeks now. It's going to be a long season, right? So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get down the stretch here. The Bills and the Seahawks was kind of much a boring 4:00 game that I could ever watch, but it was a lot better than the next. I say legitimately better than the Chiefs and Raiders game. That game was very disappointing. It just wasn't good, and I just disappointing in that Chiefs and Raiders game. It just seemed like it was so, I would not say rigged, but it definitely was rigged. The the Broncos game, never really in doubt. Panthers can't really put any points on the board. The Broncos did what they had to do with Bo Nix, and they'll continue doing what they need to do with quarterback play. I think trading Russell Wilson's coming to fruition here. And it's just a different mentality, right? So the Bears and the Commanders game got the publicity of the week for arguably one of the best last-ditch plays of all time in games. And it was pretty awesome. And it was just a really competitive game. But Commanders had did that last throw, and they scored themselves a touchdown. And they won. So Commanders won that game 18-15. Of course, a lot of people say, oh, this is like watching basketball. I hear you loud and clear. But you got two teams that are really trying to bounce back. The Commanders obviously are trying to pull away in the division and try to make themselves, be known. And then you have what I would say to every single person that listens here and listens across the DFW Metroplex, we have the most disappointing game. And obviously we have the most disappointing roster here in Dallas. I'm not a fan of the Dallas Cowboys by any means, but when you watch this team play with zero sense of urgency, with zero sense of wanting to win. The most celebrated player in that game, offensive side of the ball, was legitimately CeeDee Lamb. 13 receptions for 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb did his job. He deserves the paycheck he's getting. Okay, there's no question. Okay. Dak Prescott, however, in the defense definitely needs to step up, and I think they need to going forward. And really, the storyline there is what this is the storyline that you're going to start seeing play out in the NFL now. As we get closer to week 9, week 10, week 11, week 12, by week 12, you'll start hearing the noise of the coaches getting who's on the hot seat, those kind of conversations. And I mean this realistically here. You're going to hear some noise, especially here in Dallas, of Mike McCarthy. He's not playing with he's not coaching with a contract for next year. He's on the last year of his contract. So we'll see what happens. The Giants and Steelers on Monday night game, that was very disappointing up until the last quarter. Rushing wise, it was Tracy Jr. was really a lot. It was a threat on the ground. It's 145 yards, 1 touchdown. So he was arguably doing about 7-ish yards a carry. No, yeah, about 7 yards a carry. So it was pretty impressive to have that running side of the ball for them. The New York Giants are still in limbo, and they will be. So that's why it's kind of really disappointing for the Cowboy fans to see the Eagles and the Commanders do what they do. The NFC East hasn't had the same winner ever for the longest time. I think it's like 10 years now of 10 different winners. So I think we kind of know what you need to get yourself into here. But going forward, I think the storylines are going to see is, you continue to see parity. Obviously, the game on Thursday with the Texans and the Jets surprises me right now is that these Texans are not favorites in this game. They're the underdog by 2 points. So that kind of surprises me a little bit. The Cowboys play the Falcons week 9. A lot of divisional rivalry games. Dolphins, Bills, Commanders, Giants, Saints, Panthers, Packers, Lions. That's going to be fun. Really going to be interesting. Monday night game is going to be Buccaneers and Chiefs in Kansas City. 2 bye week teams. You have the Steelers and the 49ers on bye. So really, the 12 o'clock window is going to be interesting because the games to watch on the 12 o'clock window, you have the Commanders and the Giants. Ravens, Broncos is probably going to be the better one to watch. Chargers, Browns, that's going to be interesting. So you got some teams that are really trying to, come out of the gutter, and you got some teams that are just trying to powerhouse through. Maybe the Cowboys will put up a show on the Falcons. I doubt it. Kirk Cousins knows how to run an offense. So, but that being said, guys, I appreciate you joining me. As always, hope you have a great weekend. Make sure you vote. If you haven't voted already, do it early, do it often. Haha. I joke around about that, but I mean that sincerely. Make sure you vote. Do your civic duty. I don't care who you vote for. I will privately. I do. Publicly, I don't. I just want people to be participants of their own democracy, and whoever you want is your own business. I think going out of this way here, I'll talk about this before I do the episode on the election, which I will do probably this coming weekend. To upload for Monday going into election day. I think a lot of us in this country have got ourselves into this really big dichotomy and argument about who you vote for or who you support in any given election. At the end of the core root of the day of everything that we are as a nation, we just want people to be successful, and we want people to live their lives each and every single day better than the one before it. And I think that we as Americans really do crave that. We do really strive for opportunity and uniqueness of that opportunity and continuation of us to be successful each and every single day. I don't think we be remiss to remember every time we go through a struggle who's in power. We don't forget that. We don't forget who's in control of certain things. And yes, the rhetoric has been dialed up to like hyperbolic levels. It's what it is in this country. It always will be. We love we love our politics. But I know that we're doing sports here, but I really want to focus on, you know, sports allows us a very unique outlet to enjoy, you know, sports in a unique way that maybe we're going through something, we're troubled, we're having some trouble at home or work or relationships, whatever. Sports is always a unique outlet to allow us a way to decompress. And I think a lot of us, especially myself included, sports is something that I emphatically enjoy. It's what makes my world go around. If I plan my week for around certain things, I want, like right now, the World Series, go Dodgers. Fuck the Yankees, if you're asking. Coming from a Red Sox fan, so I have worthiness to say. So it's a unique opportunity, though, and I think we all need to kind of take a deep breath here in a couple of days and enjoy ourselves, enjoy the weekend going into Election Day. Make it fun. Make Election Day fun. Play a drinking game. Do something. Make your life feel whole. Don't worry about the politics. The politicians don't do anything for us on a day-to-day life. You still got to go to work the next day. You still got to do your daily things. Take care of the kids. Take your kids to things. Go grocery shopping. Pay the bills. Who's in office doesn't change that. So that being said, everybody, I appreciate you joining me. Have a great rest of your week.